There is a story with the Rebbe that was made public in the last few years by the Baal HaMaaseh, the person with whom the story occurred. It's an interesting story, very interesting story. He was a yeshiva bacher from a frum home. In his words, Yiddish was his first language. And he turned 18 in the late 60s. He had difficult experiences in yeshiva. And it was also quite common that kids would grow up and they would literally fry out. They would just abandon their roots. Rachmana litzlan. He went off to college. It was the age of the hippies and all the drugs and the rest. And he got caught up in that whole scene. He was really not frum. He was in the University of Buffalo, New York, and he knew Rabbi Gerari. So they had a good relationship. They talked. But to Yiddishkeit hat das nicht gehabt. He wasn't a frum person. He was involved with a rock band, with a famous rock band. He knew all kinds of people, including many non-Jews who were part of the alternative culture and so on. And his story basically is that he met a former friend who got involved in a Goyish religion, in an Indian religion, an Eastern religion. And he's lecturing him on this Eastern religion, which is real Avodah Zarah. And for whatever reason, he had a hidur tshuva. This person's talking to him about an Eastern religion moved him. And he had an epiphany, had a moment of clarity. And he had pushed a real us. He was a frum boy who had gone so far away, and from the Far East, some person comes back with this really, really strange Eastern religion, but it moved him not to become a member of that religion, but to look at his own roots. So he calls up Rabbi Gerari, mit Shailas and Kashas Ibn and Kop. Questions and questions and questions. So Rabbi Gerari tells him, such a Chassidishe thing to do, tells him, if you want answers to these questions, you have to go to the Rebbe. But in those years, 1972, to sit down with the Rebbe and ask him questions was out of the question. He couldn't get a yechidus. So he suggested that he should stop the Rebbe in the street. How did he do it? He had his brother-in-law stand with him by 770. When the Rebbe was walking up the steps, he says, walk up to him, talk to him. And he walked up to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was coming from the Oyhel or from someplace. He said it was freezing cold. It was incredibly cold. And he and the Rebbe talked for 10 minutes on the front steps of 770. And you can see him tell the story. He tells the story with incredible emotion. And the most poignant moment in the story is when the Rebbe looks at him. And the eyes. Any person who's ever seen the Rebbe's eyes never forgets it. The eyes were just so powerful. And he and the Rebbe locked in. They just connected. He says, for 10 minutes I was locked in. He didn't feel the cold. He didn't see the world. It was him and the Rebbe. And he walks up to the Rebbe and he says to the Rebbe, Binste the Lubavitcher Rebbe, you the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So the Rebbe tells him, Wer bist du, von wann seid ihr? The Rebbe didn't say yes or no. He simply asked, who are you and where are you from? So he told the Rebbe who he was, and then he asked the Rebbe if he can ask a question. And the Rebbe said, Frag, ask. So he told the Rebbe, who is God? Where is God? So the Rebbe said, Diberal, everywhere, in alles, in everything. So he told the Rebbe, yeah, aber avu, but where? So the Rebbe told him again, in a boim, in a stein, in a tree, in a stone, in everything. So he says to the Rebbe a third time, yeah, aber avu, but where? So at this point, the Rebbe tells him, Leit wie du fragst, in other words, the way you're asking the question, in dein Herz, the Eibush is in your heart. In other words, although it's true that the Eibush is everywhere, but clearly from your question, you're not talking about the presence of God, but the presence of God that you could experience, and God is in your heart. The whole time the conversation is in Yiddish, and at this point he tells the Rebbe that he wants to change to English because he wants to ask him complicated theological questions. The Rebbe says, okay, speak in English. So he proceeds to ask the Rebbe the following question. He says he had a very difficult time with the idea that the Yiddishkeit is the only truth and everything else is not true. The Jews have it right and everybody else has it wrong. And he says to the Rebbe, how could we say that we're right and everybody else is wrong? Isn't there only one God? The same God that we worship is the God that the black man worships and that the Indian worships. Why are we discriminating and distinguishing and saying that our God is the true God and their God is something not true? Something to that effect. And the answer that Rebbe gave him, which he said moved him very deeply, is a limud, it's an eon, it's a real study, it's something to learn. The answer that the Rebbe gave him was the purpose of the black man is to fulfill what is the essence of the black man. The purpose of the Indian is to fulfill what is the essence of the Indian. The purpose of a Jew, or the essence of a Jew, is to connect to God through Torah and mitzvahs. This is what the Rebbe told him, and it worked for him. This is his story. I want to explain this story to you because I think in this story lies, first of all, a very important message, and second of all, a very, very important misconception. When we talk about the essence of a person, we visualize, we imagine that the essence of a person is an infinity. And that's true, it is an infinity. If the essence of a person is an infinity, it should be plain. It should be with no flavor, which should be with no tendency. And that is not true. That's pashut wrong. The essence of a person is infinite. In other words, it's higher than reason. But the essence of a person has an essential tendency, an essential leaning. The essential leaning of the person is what the person is on the level of their essence, what you would call in Chassidus the tainug of the person. So you have a black man. A black man is a human being. Every human being has great potential. Some human beings realize their full potential. Many human beings realize their percentage of their potential, and unfortunately, some human beings never realize their potential at all. The understanding of realizing your potential according to Torah and according to Chassidus is not using your mind and your heart. It's using your mind and your heart to give voice and expression to your essence, to your pintela, to what your point is. A black man has an essence. A black man has a mind, a black man has a heart, a black man has senses, a black man has life experiences, a black man has an education and an upbringing and a family and a community and a religion. A black person achieves his end if in his life what is his essence shows itself. In other words, the l'mayla mitam vadas of this person should show itself through the tam vadas, through the midas and through the chushim that is that human being. All of us have form. Underneath that form, there's an essence. Every human being has an essence. That's what the Rebbe says to him, including a goy. But his essence is his. And if his essence shows itself through his form, he's a successful human being. If his essence is covered over by his form, he's a depressed human being. In other words, if a person's mind and heart and senses disallow the essence of what that person is, the so to speak, l'mayla mitam vadas of what that person is, to express itself through the tam vadas of that person is not fulfilling his essence. He's a trapped person. He's a klipa person. He's a chitzoniistic person. And the same is true of an Indian. An Indian has an essence. The essence of the Indian is unreasonable. It's distinct to him, and it's his basic definition. It's his teva atzmi, as given to him by God Almighty, the Eibishter himself. If he or she succeeds in giving expression to that essence through his mind and his heart and his senses and his life, he's fulfilling his purpose. And to use a psychological term, that's the only way a person will be happy. A person is happy if he fulfills his purpose. His purpose is who he is. His purpose is his personality, his essence. It's beyond reason. And a human being who says, well, something doesn't make sense, I'm not going to do it, ends up being terribly unhappy because he's allowing his mind and his heart to take over, to be a klipa that's covering over the essence of that person is, rather than be tools to help bring forward that essence. Lahavdil elef elfi avdal, a yid also has an essence. But the essence of a yid is different than the essence of a goy. The essence of a yid is, quote, to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. That's the core of a Jew. That's the l'mayla mitam vadas. That's the yechida. That's the essence of a Jew. The mind, the heart, the senses, the personality, the form of a Jew needs to be tools that bring forward that essence. And if they fail to do so, the person is trapped. In other words, infinity doesn't mean one size fits all. Infinity doesn't mean plain and without definition. Infinity means that the definition is infinite. Infinity means that the personality is infinite, that the Eibishter gave each person and each group of people an essential purpose. That essential purpose is clearly defined, it has a definition, it has a character, it's distinct from another, and nevertheless it's infinite because it's on a level which is higher than reason. And the reason of the person and the feelings of the person and the sensitivities of the person are supposed to express and bring forward that essence rather than cover over it. And that's the difference between Klip and Kedusha. That's the tragedy of the secular modern model that says if something doesn't make sense, if something is not reasonable and rational and provable, it's wrong. That entire philosophy and the culture that comes from that philosophy covers over the entire concept of an essence lahavdil of a goy, of a black man and an Indian, and lahavdil also the essence of a Jew, and that's why people are so unhappy. People are so unhappy is because they're looking for satisfaction outside of themselves. Every human being that's in the image of God, including a non-Jew, as distinct from an animal, what's going to give him happiness is his core, because his core is what God gave him. This is his personality, this is his essence. The form of the human being, the levushim of the human being, the koichas of the human being are decorations to that essence. They can either be vehicles to bring the essence forward, which gives the person happiness and purpose, or they could be tools that suppress that essence and deny that essence, as is the philosophy and culture of the modern secular world. So you can live your life and do a million things and be miserable. Miserable because what you really are, you're denying. You're denying that it's who you really are. You're even denying that it's true. Because on the Shama, an idea which is l'mayla mitam vadas goes in the face, it discredits, it on a fundamental, on an essence level, disagrees with the whole scientific model, with the whole intellectual model, with the whole idea that everything has to be provable and everything has to be logical, and there is no essence. So the Rebbe says to this Yid, we all serve the same God, but this same God has given each of us a different essence. And each one of us achieves happiness and purpose by expressing their essence, not somebody else's. I cannot be a good Jew by expressing what an Indian's essence is, because that's not me. A black person can achieve happiness by expressing the essence of what a black person is, but not by expressing the essence of what an Indian is. And the essence of a Jew is to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Torah and mitzvahs. I think it's an incredibly profound answer, and to be very honest with you, I was incredibly impressed by how this Yid understood what the Rebbe told him, because I watched the film and he says it moved me very deeply, and it took me a while to understand what was moving him. The Rebbe was saying to him, we are different on an essence level. And because we're different on an essence level, different things make different people happy. And Eretz dead head, he got it. He was a boy, he was in his early 20s. It's quite impressive. Let me give you an example for this. Let me show you where this is very, very real. There is a really, really difficult shtickle Likutei Torah. It's really difficult, but it doesn't seem to bother too many people. Likutei Torah talks about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, Hillel and Shammai. And all of us know that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue a lot. And B'derech Klal, as a rule, Beis Shammai is Machmir, Beis Hillel is Mekel. There are, of course, exceptions, Mikule Beis Shammai, Mechumre Beis Hillel, because of his scholarlos, like it says in the Tanya. But as a rule, Beis Shammai is Mekel, but Mach Beis Hillel is Mekel. So Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah, that's to do with their nature. Beis Hillel is Mekel because he comes from Chassid. Beis Shammai is Mach, but he comes from Gevurah. That's what it says in Likutei Torah. So any person should immediately jump up and say, wait, if a person is Mekel because he comes from Chassid, that means to say he's not using his mind to make a decision. He's using his heart. Arav Pascha Zashal because how he feels, or Arav Pascha Zashal because he interprets the Torah b'chachmasei, ubinasei, and daitei. A Rav comes again. Why? This is how I feel. That's not Yiddishkeit. How could Alter Rebbe say Likutei Torah? Beis Hillel is Mekel because they come from Chassid, and Beis Shammai is Mach because they come from Gvura. It doesn't make any sense. It's a very, Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah, the question is plain and obvious. And as the Alter Rebbe says once in Likutei Torah, Hakasha Teva Tiditz Pasha. The answer is very simple. Beis Shammai had a nature of Chesed. But when you say Beis Shammai had a nature of Chesed, you don't mean Beis Shammai felt kind, felt Rachmanis on the piece of meat which you're otherwise going to make treifet, let me make it kosher, he'll mabir it on aliyah. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel's tendency to Chesed was his essence, was his believable, was his infinity. It's higher than reason. Because Beis Hillel's essence is Chesed, when Beis Hillel rationalizes, when Beis Hillel is intellectual, it argues towards Chesed. That means to say like this. You and I are in an argument, right? If you and I are in an argument, I can ask you any question, you can ask me any question. If I cannot answer a question, I lose. If you cannot answer a question, you lose. But if I can answer every one of your questions, and you can answer any one of my questions, we cannot have a consensus, because each one of us is interpreting the Torah our way. Each interpretation is absolutely valid and consistent and true. So you have an impasse. You can't resolve it. That's why you have to say, Acharei Rabam Lahatis. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue. If Beis Shammai could prove Beis Hillel wrong, it's not an argument. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue. Beis Hillel could prove Beis Shammai wrong, it's not an argument. Beis Shammai is out of the picture. When Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued, they sat in the Beis HaMedrash and screamed and shouted, brought the rayas back and forth. Beis Hillel could not disprove Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai could not disprove Beis Hillel. Everybody remained intellectually in their position because each one's arguments were completely consistent, completely oisgehalten, because Torah was designed to be interpreted more than one way, so you have no choice, and you say Acharei Rabam Lahatis, which means Beis Hillel's essence was not Torah. Beis Hillel's essence, Beis Hillel's interpretation. But when Beis Hillel learns the Torah based on his essence, so Beis Shammai can argue and prove him wrong. But anything Beis Hillel will say based on his essence that Beis Shammai cannot prove wrong, that is proof that it's Torah. Torah has many drachim, many tendencies. What's the difference between one derech and Torah and another derech and Torah? The essence from which this chokhmah comes. If you discredit the chokhmah, if you refute the chokhmah, it's not Torah. But if you can argue a certain position, a certain approach to Torah, and it can withstand the challenges of attack and questioning and debate, and it stands its ground, it's Torah. The fact that it's leaning towards Chesed doesn't make it not Torah, because you're not following your heart, you're arguing with your mind, but your mind is being steered by your essence. The essence of Beis Hillel is Chesed, therefore the Seichel of Beis Hillel argued Chesed. It's Torah not because Beis Hillel said it, it's Torah because Beis Shammai couldn't refute it. Beis Shammai's essence is Gevura. Beis Shammai doesn't come along and say, I feel I want to be Machmir. Beis Shammai argues it according to Klali Torah. Beis Hillel questions him and challenges him. If Beis Hillel cannot refute Beis Shammai, that's a proof that it's Torah. In other words, there's no contradiction between something being totally logical and having a tendency. Because we're not talking about tendencies that fog the mind. Emotions discredit the mind. If you feel a certain way, you can't think. We're not talking here about midas shalamatam and aseichel. We're not talking about I'm all excited and all emotional so I can't reason. That's not ishkeit. I am completely lucid and logical and consistent and thorough and thoughtful. And my essence is telling me to reason in this way. That's an emes of Torah. It's not the absolute emes of Torah. It's one of the emes of Torah. Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim. It's completely Torah al pi seichel, even though it's based on a netiyah, because the netiyah is higher than seichel. Netiyah is your essence. And just like you understand that Beis Hillel has one essence and Beis Shammai has a different essence, and they're both learning the same Torah and they're going to give different interpretations, the same is true lahavdul. Different groups of people, they have different essences. In other words, the Eibishter gave each group a different point, which they are supposed to express through their lives, and their mind, their heart, and their senses are supposed to be tools to bring this forward. If that happens, people are happy and people fulfill their destiny. And a Yid's destiny is to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. Which leads me to my point. In other words, what I really want to talk about. And this is an idea which unfortunately I teach teenagers, young people. Many of them have a problem with this. And if I may use a cliche, I have a problem with the fact that they have a problem with it. And it's understandable. Young adults are learning about logic, about intelligence. And I believe that every one of them goes through a stage where they're really convinced that intellect can solve any problem. Intellect can figure out any truth. In other words, logic and truth are synonyms to them. And when you're in that stage in your life where you really believe in logic, the idea of the neshama, the idea of transcendence, is very difficult for you. As you get older and wiser and humbler, you discover that logic is not a truth, it's a tool. There's no truth to logic. There's truth to the users of logic, to the Baal HaLogic. If you have integrity and you use logic to express your integrity, that logic has integrity. But if you have no integrity, or you're corrupt, Rahman al-Atsan, and you use logic to support that corruption, that doesn't have any integrity. Logic has no conscience. People do. The conscience of a person, this is his essence. All of us who have been raised in Lubavitch, or the good fortune to be close to the Rebbe on one level or another, are familiar with an idea that the Rebbe has said so many times. And that is that when you're Makarav a Yid to Yiddishkeit, you're not Makarav Rechoikim. You're not bringing somebody far close. You're simply giving a person what is rightfully his. Or to say it in other words, you're bringing them home. You're introducing them to their own essence. When you put film on a Yid, when you get a Yid to a Yin of Yiddishkeit, you're helping that person get in touch with the essence of a Jew, quote, which is connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Timur Teireh Mitzvahs. One of the places where this philosophy is especially acute is when it comes to the raising of children, chinuch of children. We believe very emphatically, Chassidus, b'chlal erlich hayidin, but especially in Chassidus, that chanech lenar al pi darkei gam ki yasken leyosim mimena means a little child is reared on faith alone. You never come to a child and say, here's the reason. You say, this is how it is. Children are reared on amunah. Gam ki yaskin zeh shekana chachma, the child is going to grow up. He's going to start using his mind. If their formative years, if their foundation is a foundation of faith, you come to a little child, you don't cut his hair for 3 years, he should be wild. And then by his 3rd birthday, you put him on a yarmulke and tzitzis and payas. And you tell him about mitzvahs, and you tell him about the Eibush, you tell him about Teirah Tziva, you tell him about lighting a Shabbos candle, her, and so on and so forth. And you tell him the stories of Avei Ha'olam, of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And you tell him the incredible history of the Jewish people, and about Amun and the Eibush, and about Matan Teirah. And you don't rationalize anything. Gam ki yaskin, when this child is going to get old, he's going to suffer his mind. His mind is going to follow that early education, and he's going to be a healthy person. So the taina is, this is brainwashing. This is what the communists used to say, the Bolsheviks used to say, you have to give children only logic. And of course, only logic meant secularism, as if secularism is not a religion. It's a different religion, but it's a religion. I don't think it's a healthy religion. I don't think it's a religion that has an essence, but it's a religion nevertheless. In other words, it's unreasonable. And the communists complain, you teach a child about the Eibush, you're brainwashing him. Because God doesn't make any sense. Let him be rational until he's an adult. And as an adult, let him decide if he wants to buy into such irrational ideas as a God, as a creator, as a giver of the Torah, and so on. What is the answer to that complaint? What is the counter to that objection that says that when you come to a little child, you tell him about the Eibush, you never have him any questions, any doubts. And by the time the child is learning how to read, he's thoroughly convinced of the credibility of Torah simply because he doesn't know anything else. Why is that not brainwashing? And the Rebbe has answered this question with the point I just made, because what you're giving to the child is what is the child's essence. He is a Jew. And a Jew on his essence, which means on a level which is higher than reason, quote, achieves his destiny by connecting to the Eibush and the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs. And when you're giving that child Torah and mitzvahs, you're giving that child a connection to his essence. And when he uses his mind doesn't cover over his essence. When he uses his heart doesn't suppress his essence. When he uses his senses, it doesn't fog his essence, it gives them expression. In other words, the truth is not a rational thing. It's higher than reason. It's a godly thing. It's an essence thing. This is very difficult to explain to a teenager and to a young adult, even if they're born and raised in Lubavitch. I know this because I'm involved with people of this age. And of course, it goes against the entire culture in which we live that believes in rationalization of the mind. But this is the truth of Chassidus. This is the truth of Torah. This is the truth of humanity, if you really were honest about it. The realist things are not logical. They're just absolute. From them radiates logic, but they're absolute. A Jew's relationship with the Eibishter is fundamentally not a reasonable thing. And to be sure, every human being's self-identity, every human being's relationship with himself is also not rational. And you can kill it, you can cover it over, you can suppress it. And then you have an unhappy human being. And I know, because I've been dealing with this, how people get upset when you say this. Because when you say irrational things, people say, well, maybe you're wrong, you're being irrational. You're giving me a logical explanation that argues that logic isn't the end. The end, the truth, is higher than logic. What if you're wrong? But it's true. It's true. Any person who's a little bit experienced, who's a little bit wizened, and has lived life a little bit, knows just how true this is. And we raise our children this way, even though it's going to take them decades to understand it themselves, because we want it to be easier for them. We want it to be healthy for them. They don't have to struggle and be in pain until they discover that the truth lies inside themselves, not in the world around them. And that truth is expressed through Torah and mitzvahs, connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Torah and mitzvahs. The point, in other words, is a human being is not a clean slate that has things superimposed upon him. A human being is a creature who has everything important inside of him from birth. It's part of the hard drive. The Eibishter put it there. And his role in life is not to acquire things, but to express what he is in his life, in his world. It's not, I'm a nothing until I acquire something, but it's I'm everything, and I have to find a way of expressing that everything in my body, and in my clothing, and in my home, and in my environment, and in my relationships, and in my world. Another way of saying everything that I just said is emunah. What is emunah? Emunah means faith. Emunah means my relationship with God, which I cannot be taught. Emunah means my relationship with God, which either I have naturally, and if I don't have it naturally, Rahman al-Islam, there's no way I can get it. You cannot impose emunah, because emunah means my essence, my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is not only higher than reason. There's no relationship with reason, not even indirectly. It's my essence. Every Jew believes, and on a different level, every human being believes, and has a relationship with God. That relationship with God is their essence, and that essence is expressed through connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. But emunah is the essence itself. So life is to give emunah expression through my mind, heart, and senses, rather than have emunah suppressed, covered over by my mind, heart, and senses. I use my mind, heart, and senses to bring that essence forward. In other words, I'm a truly objective person. I'm a completely rational human being, and yet my objectivity, my rationale, has a tendency, has a leaning based on my essence. There's not a contradiction here. Like I explained to you before about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We're going to learn a Maamar tonight. I think this is our 7th or 8th class on this Maamar. And we're going to discuss matzah. It's actually a very, very small shtickle. We're not going to learn a lot tonight. The Mitzvah Hashem, I hope, will be netted of Be'ez Hashem to complete the Maamar next week, and we'll learn more next week. These 2 classes, this week and next week, are going to be talking about what's called matzah aniyah and matzah ashira. Matzah, which is ani, which is impoverished, which is poor, and matzah ashira, matzah which is rich, which could alternatively be chametz, but the Maamar calls it matzah ashira. My recollection is that the Shalah HaKadosh, has a sefer called Schneur Sabris. He has a Masechta Psachim, and the Masechta Psachim is divided into Matzah Shira and Matzah Aniyah. The difference between Matzah Aniyah and Matzah Shira physically is Matzah Aniyah, poor bread, is only flour and water. Matzah Shira has eggs. It's rich. It's tasty. Of course, our Maamar is not going to be a recipe on how to make matzahs. It's going to talk about the spirituality of it. The difference between Matzah Aniyah and Matzah Shira. In short, the difference between Matzah Aniyah and Matzah Shira is unleavened bread. But what's translated in the English Haggadah, the bread of affliction, is called Mechla de Mehemenutza. It's the bread of faith. In other words, it's the bread that relates directly to the essence as the essence is. As opposed to Matzah Shira and Chometz, which are not expressing the essence as the essence is. To the contrary, they are the reason, they are the passion, they are the sensitivities of the human being that, if used correctly, will give expression to the faith. In other words, Matzah Aniyah, the matzah we eat on Pesach, which is called in Zayir, Mechal Mehemenusa, the bread of faith. And like it says in all over the Sichos, that when Yid is eating matzah, he or she is literally eating emunah. This is the bread that relates to the essence of what a Jew is, as it is in the essence. Matzah Shira is the form, as opposed to the essence, the mind, heart, and the senses, that in a healthy person are being used as tools, as vehicles to express the emunah which lies underneath. And we all remember what the greater Maamar is about. The greater Maamar is about salt. And the Rebbe is going to bring that Matzah Aniyah does not need salt, and Matzah Shira does need salt. And the question of the Rebbe, of course, is going to be why. If you recall, our discussion on salt was that salt is like Kabbalah. By itself, it has no taste, but it gives flavor to everything. A person can learn Torah on many levels, and there could be gaiva involved, there could be ego and form involved. The kav chumtin, the preservative, the Kabbalah, adds God to one's life. The question this Maamar has is, how come when you eat matzah, you don't eat it with salt? The halachic explanation is because you want to taste the matzah and not the salt. But what's the mystical explanation? If the salt represents Kabbalah, how come when you eat matzah, you don't need salt? On the other hand, when you're eating matzah ashira, matzah with a flavor and a taste, it must have salt. So, beli neder, the matzah ashira we'll talk about next week, and it's going to be an involved discussion. But tonight, we're going to learn about why regular matzah, kosher matzah which we could use by the Seder, matzah aniyah, is not supposed to have salt. And we're on line 411. Sifches. V'hinei, lefizet tzarich lahav. Here's the question. The gabay matzah kosva aposkim. When it comes to matzah, it says in halacha, shalelitein bepas melach bepas bepesach. You don't use salt on the bread on Pesach. Olachei move on the Rebbe's question is Lafi mashin is ba'yaleil lamayla. Our Maamar explained that putting salt on bread has an incredibly profound mystical idea. And we learned that Chassidishe Melach, the root and idea of salt, is something which by itself has no taste, but gives taste to all food, or to say it more precisely, it brings the taste out of all food, and you need the salt to preserve the food. And in the Nimshal it is, all my Torah, all my mitzvahs can have gaiva. The humility is in the Kabbalah. How come? Why is it that when it comes to matzah, lo yeh melach? Why don't you need the preservative? Why, when eating matzah, do you not need the Kabbalah, the idea that I'm relating to God that's on a level which I only understand a little bit, which humbles me? Matzah over there he's talking not about bread, but something else, and he calls it matzah that it doesn't have any salt. In halach it's written you don't put salt on matzah because salt represents dinim and you don't want to have dinim connected to matzah. And the Rebbe says to the contrary, that doesn't make sense. The other Rebbe, putting salt on food, the salt by itself may be gevura, but when you join the salt with the food, it sweetens the food, like we discussed at length earlier in this Maamar. So how come eating matzah without salt? What is the answer? Acha the teretz is mevuar b'tikkunei zayar. It says in Kabbalah, in Zayar, Tikkun Samach Tes, Daf Kuf Ches Amud Aleph, Lechem oni b'lo milcha v'chulu. Impoverished bread, the bread of affliction, is eating without salt. Begin the iu matzah perusa v'chulu, because it's still a broken piece. Ad shetehei shlama, until the matzah is whole, leitzarech lekarva lo melach. There's no need to put salt on the bread as long as it's a broken piece. When the piece is whole, now you need salt. The ihu chaylim. When you have a complete piece of bread, it's the idea of chaylim. Chaylim goes on the center, and then you have to have salt. But if it's a broken piece and it's not whole, it's not chaylim and lechem and melach are the same oisius, right? Melach means salt, chaylim means the center. That's when you have to have salt. Now the center, I don't want to be maidech, you'll see later on, the center goes on to Teferes. Now, upirush, b'kisei melech, it says in a Kabbalah Sefer, that's not Kesef Mishnah, by the way, it's kisei melech. Shekshi prusa, when the bread is broken, he is dalet, it's the letter dalet, which is loshen das, which represents poverty. Haidu lechameni, bread which is impoverished. V'tzorich lahashlimo, be'eis vav b'teicha, you make it whole by adding a vav inside of it, and when you add to the vav, to the dal, the vav, shetiyah hey v'chol, then it's a letter hey. When it's a complete hey, it's considered a complete loaf of bread, and then you have to have salt. V'az dakar takriv aleha melech, only then they get salt, because it goes in gimel shemes ad Hashem shebechagas ad kan devar. This is the end of the kisei melech. When the yud, or the vav, is added to the dalet to create a hey, it's whole, then you need to have salt. But as a dalet is by itself, there's no need for salt because it's a broken piece. Now what does any of this mean? And I'm literally chomping at the bit, so I'm going to stop chomping and I'm going to tell you the point. The point is, matzah is emunah. Emunah is the essence by itself. The essence by itself does not need to be preserved. The essence by itself does not need to be protected. The essence by itself is the protection. Why do you have to have salt? Why, when you learn Torah, you need Kabbalah? Because you learn Torah, you enjoy it, you understand that your ego is enhanced. The Kabbalah humbles you. It brings the Eibishter into your learning. Emunah is not ego. Emunah is not Gishmak. Emunah is Eibishter himself. In other words, Emunah is my essence in its essence state. That needs no preservation. It is the preservation. In other words, for the same reason you normally need salt on bread, you don't want salt on matzah. Bread represents reason and understanding. You need a connection to higher than reason to preserve the health of the reason. But matzah is not reason. Matzah is the essence. The essence needs no preservation. The essence is the source of the preservation itself. Let's read it inside. 4:19, as follows. What does it mean, bread of affliction, the bread of the impoverished? It says in the Zayar, the moon has nothing of its own. All the moon has is what it receives from the sun. Under those conditions, it's considered poor. Poor means dependent and needy. And this dependency and this neediness has a humility about it. That humility is the essence of this person. That humility is the God within that person. Skip the sources. Middle of 420 now. Ve'inoni ela b'das. Oni means I'm lacking das. Lacking depth. Now what's good about lacking depth? Because the depth that you're lacking is an intellectual depth, it's a human depth. And when you lack this human depth, what remains? Only faith. What is faith? The God within you. What is faith? Your own essence. But then he says, when you join the moon with the sun, you make him fancy and sophisticated, you make him reasonable, emotional, and sensitive, the poverty goes out of its status of danger and it becomes safe. You add reason, which is from the masculine aspect, shemesh havaya, it goes out of danger. And ironically, when you add the vav to the dalet to create a hey, when you take this poor bread from a state of poverty to a state of wealth, now it needs the preservation, now it needs salt. When it's impoverished, it doesn't need the salt, the poverty itself is its own preservation. The moment it becomes sophisticated, you have to have the preservative, which is the salt. And so on. 422 at the end of the line. When it's only faith, it's the bread of affliction. It's the bread of the poor. That doesn't need preservation, it is the preservation. 424. V'hine. The beginning of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu is faith. And only faith. We all know the stories from Asipur. I think it's with the Frierdiker Rebbe, but I'm not sure. He hired a Malamed. And he asked the Malamed how the Malamed believes about telling Torah to the children. You learn Chumash. You learn the story of creation. The child has no idea how that makes sense. Creation doesn't make any sense. The child learns about the Nephilim, the giants that fell from heaven. How can he relate to that? The child hears about the Mabul, and the whole world being swallowed up with water and a few people surviving in a little boat. Can't relate to that. The child learns about Sarah being taken to Pari and to Avimelech. Can't relate to that either. And the list goes on and on. The child learns about the controversial stories of Bereshis, Yehuda and Tamar. Yosef's brother selling him into slavery. These stories are shocking. These stories are revolting. So he asked this Malamed, how do you feel about teaching children such stories? He says, yeah, I skip them. I try to be rational with the child. I leave the more extreme things for later in life. And he was told to go find himself a job someplace else. Our philosophy is that we teach children every word of Torah, including Yehuda Tamar, and including Yosef and his brothers, and including all the other stories. Why? Because we believe Torah will never corrupt. It cannot corrupt, because it's true. And you're talking to the child's soul, not his mind. You're talking to the child's essence, not his mind and heart and senses. And the essence doesn't have any questions. The essence simply says, this is the truth, I have to understand how. Not, prove it to me, and until you prove it to me, I don't understand it. This is the truth, I need to understand how. This is the foundation. Faith. Little children are told the stories of the Torah, which if you think about them as adults are completely irrational. Children don't have any questions, because their essence relates to what you're teaching him, because what you're teaching him is the form that expresses his own essence. And this is the idea that children begin with Amunah. And Pesach is the birth of the Jewish nation every year anew. We're born again. And therefore on Pesach we're all infants, we're all little children. And that's why on Pesach we eat only matzah. V'hine, line 424. The beginning of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu must be only faith. The Gemara says, we have 613 mitzvahs. Habakkuk says all 613 are one principle, like it doesn't say in chapter 33. All a Jew needs is faith. If you have strong faith, the other 612 mitzvahs fall like dominoes. If you believe in God, you keep Shabbos. If you believe in God, you put on tefillin. If you don't believe in God, everything is a struggle. And he brings rayas from Psukim, Pischu shiyarim, v'yava geitadik shemer emunim, v'hoya emunah sitecha chezin Yeshuas, which proves that the emunah lies at the heart. Line 426 at the end. Umimene yava yachakach l'bchinas hadas. The faith is the foundation. After the faith comes reason. And the moment you go from faith to reason, in other words, you're bringing the faith into the reason, now you need the preservation. That's why you learn Kabbalah. That's where the salt comes in. Says the Rabbi, as you mature, the faith becomes qualified by reason. The apprehension of the inner dimension of Torah, which is what the salt is. If a person is Mekayim, he keeps up the Torah through poverty, will eventually keep it up in wealth. I skipped a few words. This means you begin serving Hashem without intelligence. Now, how could you serve Hashem without intelligence? Answer: emunah pshuta. Eventually, you're going to get rich. First, you just believe, and in that, only belief is the greatest truth. But later on, you become reasonable, and the reason enhances the faith. And this is the pshat in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says something circular. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. If there's wisdom, there's no fear. It's like the old story. The boys say they're not going to learn until they're fed. And the Hanol says, we're not going to feed you until you learn. Here it's which comes first, fear or wisdom? The Mishnah says both. Of course, the answer is, as we all know, there's two stages. Number one, there's fear,
which opens up to reason. This is the emunah, which comes before the seichel. This is the essence, which comes before the form. There's no essence. There's no chokhmah. There's no yira first. There's no essence. Then you'll be able to rationalize. But when you're rationalizing taken, now you need a kav chum. You need to have preservation. Yiskila yiri law. You reach to a higher madrega of yira shasham in chimus. They can't become chametz at all. V'chulu. Perhaps we'll visit this later on in the Maamar. I'm not promising. Line 433. So the beginning of a yid is emunah. And emunah needs no preservation because emunah is the preservation of itself. It says the Rebbe v'zehu sha'amur, the pshat in the Chazal, yo'eh an yusal liyisrael. Poverty is befitting, is appropriate for the Jewish people. Now that doesn't sound fair. Why should it be poor? So of course the Rebbe explains that Chassidishe that it doesn't mean materially poor. To the contrary, materially should be very rich. It means sheyeh be'einav neged HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A Jew perceives himself in his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu bebechinas oni min hadas. He's poor in his ability to reason. And therefore, v'leyes bebechinas amunah. He elects to have faith alone. That's a healthy Jew. It says in Tanya chapter 18, what does it say? It says in the pasuk Pes Yam, and the whole David, a fool believes everything. And then it says the biggest chacham when it comes to God Almighty is a fool. Of line 435. Now it says in the pasuk I am lying by an animal in my relationship with you. Now how is that good? Why would a person proudly announce I'm like an animal with God? The answer is I'm not trying to be rational. I'm getting my essence, giving my essence expression because my mind cannot tolerate this relationship. As the pasuk also says, a human being is helped when he introduces the behema element. They may be very intelligent. What does intelligent mean? And nevertheless, they act like an animal who have a pure spirit in the understanding that in emunah you're closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Line 439 now, please. Therefore, when a yid stands to eat matzah, which is the beginning of Yiddishkeit, matzah is supposed to have no taste. It's bread of affliction, bread of poverty. In other words, it's emunah. V'eskafya, that a person is bending himself, b'lishum tam without any reason, and the only thing that he's giving expression to his essence, as his essence is, and he doesn't need to protect that. Valkein and litin b'melach. Melach is Kabbalah. Kabbalah preserves the form of my Yiddishkeit, not the essence of my Yiddishkeit. The essence of my Yiddishkeit is more preserving than Kabbalah could ever be. Sha'melach uneis tam. Melech is used to contribute to the tam. When a person is being rational, the Kabbalah adds the element of tam, which protects and preserves. But the Reishas HaAvodah is higher not only than Torah, it's higher even than Pnimius HaTorah, and this is called Amunah. The bread of affliction, because that's as close to the truth as you're going to get. And this is a very, very powerful message. The message is that what you are at your deepest levels is your greatest truth, and it isn't a rational truth. Which is why we compare ourselves to the moon, because we appreciate this humility. But afterwards, then you have to add richness, intelligence, feelings, and sensitivities, which is called matzah shira, which we're going to be discussed with Hashem's help and mitzvah Hashem next week. So the message of today's class is that there is something which is even more powerful than Kabbalah. What is more powerful than Kabbalah? Emunah. And just like we understand that Kabbalah is a preservative of Yiddishkeit, Emunah is a preservative of Kabbalah. If a person studies Kabbalah and thinks it takes the places of Emunah, Kabbalah stops being a preservative, becomes the opposite of a preservative. And with Hashem's help, next week we're going to learn Matzah Shira. Bli neder.